Welcome to the Courage to Reconnect. I'm your host, Sarah Monares, therapist, coach, and author. It has always been important to me to create intentional spaces to talk openly about the things so many people quietly carry alone. Because it's in the open that we heal, and it's in the open that we allow ourselves to be fully seen. In this space, we have real conversations about things like relationships, attachment, anxiety, codependency, healing, and the patterns that keep us disconnected from ourselves and the people we care about most. Together, we'll explore what it means to reconnect with yourself, create healthier relationships, and become more fully who you really are, and exit your loop. I'm so glad you're here. Let's get brave and dive in. By now, you should be somewhat aware of the disconnection loop, what it looks like, how it works. And while we will continue throughout this podcast to break down each part of the loop in more detail, you now should have a general understanding of the overall structure of the loop. And before we spend more time breaking it down further, I want to give you an overview on how to exit the loop. This is something that I will be referring back to over and over again. This is so that as we keep going through this, you'll have some tools to work on to start incorporating that goes beyond just awareness. I developed the C.H.A.N.G.E method, which is what we're going to focus on today, based on my thoughts and experiences of what works best with people. While I have learned a lot about different theories and philosophies and ways of thinking, ways of conceptualizing growth and people during my time getting 2 master's degrees, I find that knowledge to be very valuable, and it has laid a really strong, secure foundation for me. And the more important learning that I feel I've received is that from my clients over the past 20 years. So I have gotten a very real view of what doesn't work, what does work, what feels the most effective, and what, again, are the themes that come up over and over and over again that are required for people to have for healing. I have always been more of an action-oriented person. There are a lot of therapists out there, and really, maybe this is a good time to give you a little explanation of what the difference is between therapy and coaching. Therapy tends to be more past and present focused, healing past wounds, focusing on trauma, things primarily from the past and how those are affecting you in the present. Coaching is actually more present and future focused. If you're doing coaching with someone, you should never really be going into the past. What we do in coaching is we focus more on how are you functioning today and how do you want to be in the future. While sometimes we need to gather information to use in the present and where we want to be, it shouldn't be focused on reprocessing traumas, anything like that. So I've always been naturally much more of a solution-focused therapist, of a therapist that is more drawn to the coaching approach. The reason for that is because I don't necessarily believe that we have to re-experience or consciously reprocess trauma or experiences that we've had that were detrimental or hurtful in order to heal or change them. I believe we just need to understand the response that they have created within us today. And then we focus on what's not working and where we want to go moving forward. So here, you're going to learn how awareness becomes change through things like courage, self-compassion, nervous system regulation, and practicing new ways of responding and reconnecting. I'm going to walk through each step of the C.H.A.N.G.E method with you and give you an explanation of each step. So the C.H.A.N.G.E method is an acronym. C.H.A.N.G.E is an acronym, and the C and the E are always consistent. The C and the E are always the first and the last step. The middle part of the word can be interchangeable. Sometimes they kind of all work together. So that's important to understand that they're not necessarily, you have to do them step by step. They're really kind of intertwined in a sense. So starting with the C, though, is vital because the C stands for create space. And why is this so important? It's because as humans, typically, we don't create space for our own growth, our own healing. Maybe we create space in a sense of listening, consuming, taking things in, but not space for processing those things that we've taken in, processing feelings that have been hard or difficult or uncomfortable, situations that are difficult, feelings that are coming up that we don't quite know how to process or we don't want to deal with. Creating a clear space to listen to yourself, to process, to sit with the uncomfortable, to be intentional about exiting your loop, getting the information that you need. Now, this looks different for everyone. I think that there's a lot of misconception out there about the amount of space that you need. And sometimes space is energetic. Sometimes it's also time space, right? So you can sit down and meditate for 30 minutes, but if you're not in a place energetically to hold that space, to be in that space, it's not going to be very productive. If you have a super busy life and you don't feel like you have time to create space, which is another subject, right? We talk about prioritization. But there are ways that you can create space in your daily life without needing this big, long practice that you're not actually going to follow through with. And then you're going to beat yourself up about because you didn't follow through. That's totally counterproductive, and that's not what we want. So the expectation with creating space is figuring out how you can do it in your day already as it is. So an example of this would be when you're driving to work, to not have on the radio, not be listening to an audiobook or a podcast, not have noise coming in, and drive to work in silence. Talk to yourself, have a conversation with yourself. This leads into the next steps, and I'll give you some structure around that. But being intentional about some silence. If you're home and you can sit down and journal, if you can go for a walk and not have earbuds in, listen to the birds chirping and the things that are going on around you. I think that the intentionality is what matters the most. And if you're intentional about 2 minutes, then that's helpful, right? It's helpful to know, okay, for the next 2 minutes, I'm going to listen to myself. Something that I think is important to bring up is sometimes, a lot of the time, this is really uncomfortable for people. And so they don't create space because they don't want to listen to themselves, or they're afraid of what they're going to hear, or maybe they feel like it's too loud inside their brain. You're going to create space as much as you can tolerate at any given time, right? But you do have to challenge yourself. And this goes back to the end of engaging in new action. It loops back around in a sense. So being able to be brave enough to create the space, having the courage to reconnect. That's what this podcast is all about, because it takes courage to create space and sit in the uncomfortable. I will be giving you lots more ideas when we come to the episode that is just for creating space. But that's the first step, being intentional about creating space. The second is H, which is have curiosity. Having curiosity is absolutely vital. And so as human beings, what we tend to do is we judge ourselves. Self-judgment is a big part of the disconnection loop, and it's one thing that really keeps us stuck inside the loop. Because when you're in judgment of yourself, you cannot gather the information that you need to do things differently. So let's say that I'm late for an appointment. I don't like being late. I don't want to be late. I show up late. I'm really hard on myself for it. I beat myself up. I leave the appointment just feeling like crap for the rest of the day because I've told myself how unorganized I am, how I should have it more together than I do. I judge that behavior. And when I come out of that, I'm actually not coming out of it. I'm staying in it, totally beat up and battered by myself. And when you're beat up, you can't take steps forward. So to be able to switch that to curiosity, why was I late today? What was going on? Do I have too much on my plate? Curiosity is about trying to pull yourself out of the situation and see it from a broader view. When you're just starting to do this, sometimes it's really helpful to be able to see yourself almost as a science experiment, looking at yourself as, why does this human do these things? Why would they show up late for a really important meeting if they knew that they needed to be there on time? Why would that happen? So curiosity lets you gather the information that you need so that you can make changes. The next one is A, which is allow awareness. And in allowing awareness, this goes hand in hand because this is where you are gathering the information. You're allowing the discomfort without immediately reacting. You're going to the place of why. Why is this happening for me? Where does this come from? What do I need? How do I feel? What's coming up for me? What is this triggering inside of me? What is the fear that is running my loop right now? When we have uncomfortable feelings, they're there to give us information. And one of the reasons why we so easily stay stuck inside the loop is we don't want to get the information because it's uncomfortable. And so the feeling just stays in the background. It's like a little noisy 2-year-old, like, pay attention to me, pay attention to me. And we keep telling it, be quiet, be quiet, be quiet. And the reality is it's not going to go away until we get the information that we need from it. So allowing awareness is allowing yourself to go to that place, get the information that you need so that you can release it. This is about actually processing through it and not avoiding it. Next one is N, which stands for nurture self-compassion. I would say that this is the hardest step for most people. Why is that? Oh, self-compassion it's a hard one. It's a really, really hard one because most of us have been programmed to believe that if we are compassionate to ourselves, then it's either excusing our behavior or it's keeping us from being productive. So if I give myself compassion for being late to this important appointment, then that means that I'm just going to do it again. And if I really beat myself up, maybe it'll keep me from doing it again in the future. That notion is completely false. It actually just keeps you stuck inside that loop. And so finding compassion for yourself and your behaviors. Once you have the awareness around those behaviors, it's a bit easier to have compassion because it's easier to say, of course I would act that way, or of course that makes sense. It makes sense that I would be late when I am getting kids ready and didn't have enough time and went to bed too late last night and my needs aren't being met and I'm not speaking up for myself or whatever it is, the information that I get. It makes sense that I would not be totally put together and on time and ready for this appointment first thing in the morning. So being able to say, okay, yeah, I see you, I hear you, I'm present with you, and you deserve compassion, even if you didn't like your behavior. We cannot beat ourselves through change. It's impossible. We have to love ourselves through it. We have to grab our hands and lead ourselves through. It's usually easier for us to find compassion for other people, much easier than finding compassion for ourselves. So it's a part that you will probably have to spend more time on. A lot of people do, and that's okay. There's compassion to be had around that because you're really undoing a very common cultural norm, societal expectation, programming that is hustle culture, productivity. And so where does your lack of self-compassion come from? That would be a really good question to work through the change method on. Next, we have ground yourself in truth. That is the G. And this is really two parts. So the first part is grounding yourself and your nervous system. That is one part. Grounding should be happening throughout this entire method. Sometimes you can ground yourself as you're creating space, grounding yourself as you're going through the steps. Grounding brings you into the present moment. And I will do an entire episode on grounding techniques, what that means, why it's important for your nervous system. But for the purpose of this episode and time, grounding is engaging your five senses to pull yourself out of past or future thinking. Pull yourself out of that spiral so that you can ground here now in this present time and come to this situation with more of a wise mind than coming to the situation out of an activated fight or flight nervous system response. So one of my favorite grounding techniques that I'll share with you quickly is if you take your finger, your middle finger or your thumb, whichever finger feels best to you, and you rub it together really, really gently. So gently that you can feel the fingerprints on the tips of your fingers. Do you feel them? It resets your brain and brings you here. So things like if you have a cup of water or a cup of coffee and you take a drink and you hold it in your mouth and focus on how does this taste in my mouth? How does it feel? Is it cold? Is it hot? Feeling your feet on the ground, their contact with the ground, feeling your toes inside your socks. These are examples of ways to ground yourself. They sound simple, but they're really, really powerful and important. The second piece of ground yourself is truth, right? Ground yourself in truth. So, one question I love to ask is, what percentage of the belief that's fueling your loop is true? So, let's use the example of my tardiness to the appointment. And so maybe I have a belief that I don't have it all together. They're going to think that I am a bad person, or I'm not skilled enough for the job, or whatever the appointment is, and that I'm going to fail, or that's the fear, right? Or I'm going to get fired. And so if I look at the belief is ultimately, I would say we can narrow it down to, if I'm not perfect, I'm not valuable. If I can sit with that belief, I've identified it, I know what it is, then I can really challenge, is it 100% true? Because when we're in the loop, our brain tells us that it is. It is 100% true. That's very rare that it's actually 100% true. And so if I sit with that and I am grounded and I've done all the other steps, I can really understand, if I'm not perfect, I'm not valuable. It's not true, right? If I break it into percentage, maybe I would say it's actually only 20% true, let's say. So that's 80% that's not true. And now I can tell my brain that. I can help my brain understand 80% of this belief is not true. So what do I want to do with that? I don't think it's helpful or necessary to focus in on the 20% of my brain that still feels that that's true, because here's why. Our human brains tend to go from one extreme to the other. So something that I see a lot when people are trying to make changes and they're trying to change behavior, get out of their loop. Let's use the example of setting boundaries. They tend to go from, maybe one extreme would be a people pleaser who never speaks up, doesn't set boundaries, doesn't tell people how they really feel. And they're trying to change that. They're going through this method. They're getting brave and they're trying new things. It's really common then to go to all the way to the other opposite end of the spectrum. And we want to be really aware that we're not doing that. Because at the other end of the spectrum is extreme, rigid, severe boundaries that are also going to keep us disconnected from ourselves and our relationships. Because when we're in a healthy relationship, yes, we need to set boundaries, but it's not so rigid that the other person doesn't also have a say. And we don't want to go from being a people pleaser all the way to being a perpetrator, in a sense. So what is the happy in-between place? If I need to believe 20%, maybe an 80%, then maybe that is more of a happy in-between place. Because if I go all the way to it's 100% not true, first of all, that's too big of a leap. I'm probably not going to get there, especially at first. And if I expect myself to be at 100%, then it's harder to move forward. If I can accept the 20% and I can say, okay, maybe that 20% serves me in helping me to follow through and helping me to want to do a good job and want to be on time. And so I don't want to go from 0 to 100. Neither do you. So what is the happy in between? Now, last, we are going to the E, which is engage in action. this is always the last step. And in my opinion, it's one of the most important because, as you've heard me say before, there's a lot of awareness out there about why we do the things that we do, lots of personal growth on, different topics, the why. But then there's not a lot of emphasis on, okay, what do you want instead? Where do you want to go instead? What do you want this to look like instead? How are you going to engage in action to exit the loop and make it different? This is brave action and practice to have different responses. So some of that is about just building trust with yourself through action. Maybe it's sitting and just having emotional presence. It's even just sitting and creating space. That's an action. That's a brave action. Setting boundaries, being honest with your partner or your friend that hurt your feelings. That authenticity and being able to have hard conversations, staying connected to yourself during conflict or feeling afraid. All of these things are really brave action. And every time you take a brave action, the more you teach your brain that you are going to follow through. You are going to make changes. This is how you build trust for yourself. And that you can trust yourself. I can trust myself if something arises to take action because I know that I will. Now, I think that it's important to remember sometimes we need help in engaging in action. And so sometimes that means therapy, coaching, having someone close to us in our lives know this is the work I'm doing, especially I think if you're in a relationship, letting your partner know, hey, I've really realized I'm a people pleaser. I don't speak up. I'm pretty resentful most of the time. I'm going to make some changes and I'm going to start doing that differently. And so this is how that's going to look for me. If you don't have anyone in your life personally who's supportive of these changes, then I think it's even more important to get that professional support. There are other things too. You can look for my Courage to Reconnect workbook and go through that, dig in even deeper into each of these. But remembering that engaging in action doesn't mean that you have to do it alone. Sometimes the bravest thing that we can do is ask for help and to let other people come and surround us and lift us up and encourage us in the changes that we need to make for ourselves. All right, so that is the change method in an overview. And as I said, we will continue to be diving deeper into each of these steps, but the next time something comes up for you, the next time you realize, oh, I'm in the loop, there's my loop, I encourage you to go through these steps, walk through them, and see how you feel. See how it feels differently for you. Recognition requires practicing new responses, not just understanding old patterns, but practicing every single day. You're not going to be perfect at it at first. It's going to take more time at first, but the more you do it, the faster and faster this becomes. So I just want to end today helping you to know and understand that healing does not mean perfection, that it's practice, that change happens through small, brave steps repeated over time. You don't need to go from never running at all to running a marathon tomorrow. It's really just about focusing on the next right step and the next right step and the next right step and practicing reconnection in your everyday life on a daily basis. Thank you for being here with me today on the Courage to Reconnect. If this episode resonated with you, I'd love for you to subscribe, leave a review, or share it with someone who may need it too. You can listen to all of the episodes over on couragepod.com. Remember, change doesn't happen through awareness alone. It happens when we begin showing up for ourselves with curiosity and self-compassion, taking brave action, and practice reconnecting instead of repeating the same old patterns. Until next time, keep finding the courage to show up and stay connected, even when it's uncomfortable. I am cheering you on. This podcast is produced by Loudspeaker, and it is intended for educational and informational purposes only. It is not a substitute for therapy or individualized mental health care. Listening to this podcast does not create a therapeutic relationship with Sarah Monares or any other guests. If you need additional support, I really encourage you, please reach out to a licensed mental health professional in your area or visit findahelpline.com for international information about mental health support near you.
This is Loudspeaker.